I straight up Google Ectoin and Ectoin skincare. And up top, a bunch of products pop up. Let me tell you, don't do that. Because some of the products that popped out was like products I know of or used before.
Also, I don't think have Ectoin.
Exactly. Half of them don't have Ectoin. I don't even know why it popped up. Right. Welcome back, everyone, to the Chemist Confessions podcast. I'm Gloria.
I'm Victoria.
This is a human conversation on all the skincare science we talk about on the daily. And today is a more science-focused episode on Ectoin.
And I think there's going to be half that are like, yes. And then there's other half that are like, what?
Well, this was a hotly requested topic last year.
Yes.
And I will say this is my New Year's resolution as we're entering almost Q2 of this year, is trying to be more on top of topic requests, because I feel
there's
like
so many.
There are so many.
And it's a backlog. And I got to be honest, there's some topics where Gloria and I will look at it and be like, let's push it down.
Yeah, Ectoin was actually one that I've wanted to do, but just kind of keep getting shuffled around.
Yeah.
And to the point that at this point, I'm like, do people still care about Ectoin? But you know what? It's interesting enough for us to talk about.
Yeah, which is, hear that as a green flag.
Yes.
All right, so let's just get right into it and start off with, what the heck is even Ectoin?
Yeah, so Ectoin is simply just a type of amino acid. These are found in what we call extremophiles. Extremophiles are bacteria that live in really harsh conditions that most organisms can't survive. And if you remember from school, these are really, really hot places, really, really, really cold places, and then really, really salty places. And Ectoin in particular is found in those bacterial species that live in really salty places. And what it does is, what makes salty environments really hard for organisms to survive is osmotic pressure. When there's all that salt, your water in your cell just wants to go places, and it's not great. And Ectoin acts as what they call osmolyte, a little ingredient that kind of helps a bacteria just withstand that level of osmotic pressure.
Yeah, and if you picked up on the word osmolyte, you might have now started seeing this word in skincare. And I just want to say, Ectoin, with this kind of background, that totally makes sense why it ended up in our skincare. I'm sure you guys have always heard of those, what we call exotic claims that from nature, and how they're a lot of either plants or living organisms are able to withstand really difficult scenarios and thrive. And that's just it's one of those classic stories. So it only makes sense that Ectoin is now in our skincare. But in terms of what it actually does for skin,
it can be a little mysterious, and I think Ectoin has been around for quite some time.
Yeah,
it's actually used. I was a little surprised because I don't think that's the case in the States, but in the EU, it's an OTC ingredient that you can find in your nasal drops and allergy eye drops.
Did not know that either.
Right, so it's actually been used for a long time, but I suspect this new wave of Ectoin buzz came from certain articles that compare it with niacinamide, saying that Ectoin is the new age niacinamide. I don't know what that means, but it sounds very cool. But we should start with the whole story, which is how it got put into skincare to begin with. Other than the extremophile, sexy osmolyte story, there's actually a lot of in vitro data on it as a potential skin protectant, if you will.
So in terms of what Ectoin does, we are going to share an in vitro study where they wanted to look at 2 different concentrations of Ectoin and whether or not it was helpful in terms of keratinocyte viability against UV damage and oxidative stress, and generally hydrogen peroxide induced oxidative stress. We'll put the results up here for you guys to look at. Ultimately, you can see that this is really considered as a preliminary test to see if Ectoin was in fact helpful in preventing keratinocyte cell death against UVA damage and oxidative stress. So generally, this is considered as kind of a preliminary green light to keep looking at it. So this is the general concept of why Ectoin was considered interesting for skin and skin benefits.
Yeah, so this is the type of test that actually a lot of ingredients we talk about on this podcast gets put through in the very beginning, especially a lot of antioxidants like resveratrol, silymarin. A lot of these type of ingredients have this data. Again, first green light.
Step numero uno.
And you guys know that this is a positive sign that this is in the first segment and not in the meat segment.
So true.
So we're going to take a quick break now, and we're going to get into the data of what Ectoin actually does for you topically.
A break. Double Play is our superhero treatment with 0.3% encapsulated retinol and 2% haloxyl peptides with other actives. It is powerful enough to target fine lines and wrinkles all over face while still gentle enough to be used on your delicate eye.
This is thanks in part to the relatively less glamorous 2% niacinamide and algae extract blend that we incorporated to support your barrier functions while minimizing retinal irritation. So start your retinal journey today with code CCPodcast2025 for 15% off. All right, we're back. And let's dive right into what Ectoin does for skin. And I'm going to preface this with, we're addressing a couple questions here. The first is we're going to look at a couple, based on the in vitro study that Victoria shared, we are immediately in that barrier function kind of realm. So we're going to share a couple studies in that category, how Ectoin actually performs there. And then we're going to try to address the question of, well, okay, does Ectoin actually measure up to niacinamide? Because that is what made this so popular in, oh my God, at this point, probably a year or 2 years ago, but we're going to dive right in.
All right, so the first study, definitely have to say, is pretty interesting by design. So it's a very small study, though. They actually only had 5 subjects, and this is a 4-arm study. So application of all products are just going to be on the forearm and tested there. However, we should mention what they wanted to do was look at multiple concentrations of Ectoin in different scenarios. The first scenario we're going to try to help explain is that what they did is have participants apply either they had, of course, an untreated site, a placebo cream, a 2% Ectoin cream, and then a 5% Ectoin cream. And what they did is they had participants apply this treatment for 7 days. After that, they then applied basically a silica emulsion.
It's like a dehydrating gel with a lot of powdery crap. Just think about it like that.
It's hilarious that Gloria found this, because if you've listened to us for a long time, you will know that Gloria hates silica in any formula for her dry skin. This is exactly that. It's an oil absorbent, and it's only makes sense that I think actually this is the first time I've ever seen silica used as a dehydrator. But anyways, all right, so they apply this silica patch on skin for 2 hours and then proceed to measure skin after that removal at 10 minutes, 2 hours, 4 hours, and 24 hours. Ultimately, by doing this, they want to see if Ectoin has that kind of barrier protection aspect long term. And by not applying it after, is skin more, I guess, in a way, armed to handle a dehydration scenario, which is kind of interesting.
I love the study design because it's so unique. Last year, we did a hydration run, right? We did urea, we did hyaluronic acid, and glycerin. And all these are classified as humectant. So they hydrate your skin by holding onto water. And this is an immediate effect. And that is an important aspect of using a moisturizer. But a lot of studies that kind of looked at whether or not that effect sustains, like after you stop using, it's not as creative as this. This is basically signaling that Ectoin, if you use Ectoin, your skin is that much more ready to handle harsher conditions, which kind of lines up with that extremophile background of where Ectoin comes from.
So we'll share the results here. For audio listeners, what we will mention is that you can definitely see that the 5% Ectoin performs the best, and then 2% actually does also have a difference compared to both placebo and the untreated site. Now, it's not going to be of any significant improvement or reach significance just because the sample size is so small, but it's definitely interesting and definitely kind of, I think, hints at its potential benefit for skin. But they didn't stop there. They did another study where they wanted to look at an Ectoin product daily for 12 days. And then after that, they will stop use and then take a measurement 1 week after application. The only interesting thing about this, I should point out, is that the concentrations changed. So instead of the 2 and 5 we were discussing, it went down to 0.5 and 1%.
Why? I don't know.
Not really sure why, but they took corneometer measurements, and what that does is measure the water content in skin, essentially. And so they measured it every day for the 12 days, and you can see that at basically 0.5 and 1%, they did see an increase in hydration. And then after that 12-day period, and then they had subjects stop use and took a measurement again, they only include the 1% Ectoin, but they saw that the 1% Ectoin topical had still maintained hydration much higher than the control site.
You know, when we were putting this episode together, I was like trying to do it quickly, and I feel like I mentally zoomed in on the first chart. I'm like, cool. I never registered to me that somehow the 0.5 group just managed in the 7 days post.
We're just going to assume it didn't do much after the 7 days.
So you need at least 1% Ectoin. Noted.
Yeah. Ultimately the data, the bar graphs, they are interesting. Again, it's only 5 subjects. So I think, again, this is that kind of like preliminary clinical to be like, great, let's keep testing. Let's test a bigger subject size. Let's test it actually in real-time scenario. But we will say, I gotta be honest, I don't have a good gauge of concentration of Ectoin from this study. We have a range. So yeah, but overall a really promising study to keep digging.
Yep. So we will say Ectoin for us is definitely one that's worthy of talking about because they have a lot of data, right? We actually had the problem of having to pick and choose what we share in this episode here.
Yeah.
The next clinical that we're going to walk through, to me, kind of highlights Ectoin and what you can expect from Ectoin with more longer-term use. This is a 2% Ectoin study. There is 104 subjects in this study, which sounds really cool, but it's actually broken up into 3 subgroups. So 30 each group, just so that you have some sort of just so you can do statistical analysis on the data. One group applies a placebo, and the other group applies a test cream with the 2% Ectoin. And there's actually one group that got the crap end of the stick because they just got nothing. So you have an untreated group too. And they apply for twice a day. I find this to be a little too ambitious for the sample size. They included people with dry and sensitive skin. They didn't hone in on a particular skin type, but nor did they distinguish between the different skin types in the data set. So it's like a little muddled here. And they applied it for 4 weeks, and we'll put the results up. They definitely measured hydration, but they tried to go a step beyond and measure skin elasticity as well to see maybe the skin protective effect can translate to some sort of anti-aging benefit.
Yeah.
Okay. They labeled this kind of weirdly. Product B goes first because that's actually the test cream with 2% Ectoin. And then they have product A, which is the placebo, and then they have the control. So first off, the control is very clear. Untreated, skin is the same in week 0, week 4.
It sets up basically a barrier of what normal skin looks like at hydration.
Yep. And then product A, the placebo, showed some improvement in hydration after 4 weeks, while product B showed what looks like a little bit
Slightly
better than product A, improvement in hydration. And you might be wondering why the placebo group, the blank test cream, even had the improvement in hydration. Well, we're glad to say that they actually did share the formula of the 2 creams in the study.
We'll put the ILs for you up on the screen, but ultimately we'll read off, and I think you guys will quickly get a sense of why. The control cream basically had water, jojoba oil, mineral oil, glycerin, cetearyl alcohol, pentylene glycol, yada. It's very basic, but you can already hear there's some really great emollients. There's glycerin and there's mineral oil. So it totally makes sense that even just the placebo cream was able to reach the statistical significance with hydration.
Yep. So it proves that Ectoin does add a little more pizzazz to your hydration cream, or just a regular cream. And then we looked at the elasticity data. The bar graph, I have a really hard time looking at it. For audio listeners, it's just like all the bars because they have the before-after graphs of group A, B, C. So if you're comparing the 3 groups across the board, you kind of have to squint to see what is happening.
Yeah.
But they gave us the raw data too, which is fantastic. So product A, the vehicle cream, elasticity, they called it deteriorated. It got worse over time over the 4 weeks. It went from 0.11 to 0.12.
But it was a 3.5% deterioration.
And product B, the product with Ectoin, improved, and it went from 0.12 to 0.11. So it's
Yeah, it's we'll just plainly say Ectoin doesn't seem to be, at least at the 2% level, doesn't seem to be all that helpful in terms of elasticity. They also took a different type of elasticity measurement, also generally abysmal improvements all around. So yeah, we could say this is not really all that interesting.
Yeah, we don't really know what the takeaway is. Yeah. Well, the test is short for any sort of like elasticity data. You might want to test at least for 8 weeks.
Very true.
But at the same time, it's like, is this a green light to keep going? It's hard to say
Yeah. And we should also talk about some of the other measurements they took, which is looking at general like skin surface structure. We're talking about like barrier care, long-term health, all of this. They actually looked at things like roughness, scaling, smoothness, and volume. And they did find that what's interesting is they did find that both the vehicle and the Ectoin cream had seen significant improvement in terms of roughness, scaling, and volume. Smoothness, it didn't seem like they saw much of improvement after 4 weeks. Again, this could be a general scenario where it needs to just be tested for longer, but we can't really say. However, in terms of the Ectoin cream, it did perform better than the vehicle cream. So that I think is definitely worth mentioning in terms of, I think, kind of the dry skin woes that we often have.
Yeah, and kind of referencing back to our episodes last year on all the humectants, this is the type of data that we find in, say, urea studies, where they looked at not just hydration, but the physical appearance of dry skin. So this is actually pretty good data all around. So that's basically in a nutshell what Ectoin does for skin. And yes, most of the data is centered around hydration, skin barrier function improvement, and general just dryness improvement.
I think that was kind of my one gripe with Ectoin is the in vitro data. Clearly, they were trying to test for broad spectrum claims. Like what is the direction of benefit? And then it was looking at things like almost like antioxidant properties. And then you get to the clinical and you're like, hydration data. I give thee a lot of hydration data.
Yes.
So that was the only one thing where I'm like, it did take a bit of a left turn. But we would say pretty solid hydration data in the grand scheme of even those hydrating ingredients.
Yep. So these clinicals look at Ectoin from the 0.5 to 5% range-ish. We should mention that there is a big pool of data of Ectoin that comes from testing for healing atopic dermatitis. And these tests usually use it at the 5.5 to 7% concentration. So much, much higher. And looking at it from more of a, on top of the barrier function improvement, also looking at it from a soothing aspect. And these studies are pretty big, but we're not going to get into it because these are not typical concentrations you'll see from just a cosmetic serum or something you can market. An example study I pulled just really quickly to walk through the top line, just to walk through. There's a cream called the Dermaveel. I believe this is available in Polish pharmacies. They use Ectoin at 5.5%, and this was tested. I do love this part of the study. This was tested on 242 subjects, age range between 1 month to 88 years, with a mean of 9 years. So this is tested from cradle to grave, anyone who may have atopic dermatitis, and it showed that
that's pretty great.
Over time decreases the erythema score. And
I can definitely say, as a mom to a child that has eczema, I appreciate the testing on younger kids. I also appreciate their parents.
Yeah, actually, I do like the age range, even though I didn't get into the study too much. I don't know the age range breakdown. But that is something that's actually really hard, is things like baby products that's actually been tested on babies and kids. Yeah, very few. Those studies are hard to run.
Yeah, for sure.
Anyway, the last question we want to address in this meat section is, does Ectoin compare with niacinamide? Does the claim that this is the new age niacinamide hold up?
I have to be honest, I have a tinfoil hat theory that they will try to do anything to compare any ingredient to niacinamide. This is not the first comparison we've heard. There's a lot of claims where, generally around how niacinamide is supposed to help with ceramides and all that barrier care. I just feel like, is that the new target comparison because niacinamide just has that like marketing power behind it? Because I'll be honest, I'm like, I just was not on my radar in terms of comparisons.
Yeah, before we get into the study, I'm just going to preface and say, no, it does not.
Oh, okay, let's skip to the end.
Well, because I feel like, well, first of all, we spent all this time talking about barrier function, hydration.
Yeah.
Niacinamide is niacinamide and is popular because it has a lot of data. It's an important part of your skincare, like general whitening, brightening routine. It has data on pores and oily skin. It also
jack of all trades. Truly is. It just has been tested in all these like broad spectrum aspects, and I think that's why and also it's very easy for us to work with. So then sprinkle everywhere.
Yeah, exactly. So no, Ectoin doesn't have the same level of broad spectrum data. So I would say the comparison doesn't make any sense. And the comparison is basically made on just like the barrier function aspect.
Even though the mechanism still, you're like, okay.
Yeah, exactly.
You're really just throwing a dart out there.
I was able to find one study on comparing the two. But I should say that this whole niacinamide versus Ectoin comparison is not the point of the study at all. This is like a blip in one. It's like literally a blip of a blip in one study.
Yeah.
So this study basically looked at different ways of reducing irritation potential potassium glycosyl glycinate, which is a surfactant.
Yeah, I gotta be honest. First of all, whoever did this study deserves mad props because this study is super technical. They actually looked at multiple surfactants, then to show proof as to why potassium glycosyl glycinate was the choice. Then from that, then did all of the irritation potential studies with a bunch of other ingredients, including niacinamide and Ectoin. So when I was reading, I was like really impressed. And then the other thing that I thought was like, this person has it out for amino acid surfactant.
Yeah, it sounds gentle, but it's not. Okay.
Yeah, basically it was like really sick and tired of the fact that people kept saying amino acid surfactants are gentle because they compared it even to like SLES, like kind of the more common culprits that get flagged. So I kind of really felt for the person behind this.
I really like this. We don't do a ton of podcast content cleansers because it's like it's really hard to talk about without getting into the holistic formula.
And very technical.
Yes. And this is actually part of the site. This is a total off-tangent segue. But when we were formulating our blank slate, we do have an amino acid surfactant, but it's there to support. It's like here in terms of the spectrum of like it's there, but
for audio listeners, Gloria's hands went way down.
Yeah,
way down the list.
Yeah, there's a place in your formula for it, but if you're letting it run the show, you might have to dial in with other ingredients. Is what we're saying.
Very true.
Anyway, run it back to Ectoin. They did a bunch of tests on different ingredients and how it affects irritation potential, and they measured two values. One is a Zyme value, which is and one's a Zyme value and one's a hemolysis ratio. Not going to get into it, but basically these are standard tests to measure surfactant irritation potential. And in the study, they did the control, which is just the surfactant, and then they added a bunch of different support ingredients, all in the same concentration, to see how it affects these two values. What they tested was hydrolyzed sodium hyaluronate, carnosine, ectoin, betaine, and niacinamide. And we're just going to put the chart up there. And in the study, you can kind of see from the bar graph that ectoin, betaine, and niacinamide perform relatively on par in terms of decreasing that irritation potential. That's it, guys. That's all the comparison data I can find between ectoin and niacinamide.
Yeah, and we should mention these different values, the Zyme value, the hemolysis ratio. They are different properties of the surfactant. They basically are different markers. So let's say one has a really good Zyme value versus one has a better hemolysis ratio. That means both can be helpful, but in different ways. So hopefully that kind of explains how to like think about these. Ultimately, they're very technical numbers, but that's basically how their surfactants are looked at in vitro manner, kind of a quick analysis of how to measure and gauge. But yeah, I when Gloria shared this study with me, I wasn't sure where this was going, but I see we are grasping at straws here.
Well, I should mention that I wanted to share this because this was the only study I could find that have them in the same
To be honest,
capacity,
very surprised,
right? But even in the study, I should add that the side note here is irritation potential of surfactants is a very particular use case. It doesn't translate to soothing topical applications. Because in the study, again, we're not going to get into it, right? It's talking about how it affects my cell structure, how it affects different interaction with protein. So all these are different than leave-on product considerations. So the point of sharing this is to say, does Ectoin compare to niacinamide? No, it does not. That's it.
Not even a little bit. There's not enough data to say, one way or another for sure. So I guess you can ignore that claim if you ever hear it.
Yep. So to sum up all the findings we have on Ectoin is the key here, what Ectoin does for skin is barrier function, soothing, and hydration. And what makes it kind of an interesting ingredient is the first study we shared. The hydration aspect doesn't just come from its water-grabbing abilities. It does seem to help improve your skin's own barrier function. And then the second point is it the new age niacinamide? No.
And I think the other thing that I wanted to say is I think Ectoin, when we were kind of browsing the product landscape and we'll talk about it more in the next episode, the claims can get a little artsy, the way they describe it. It's kind of magical. We've seen it tied to being called as an osmolyte, all of that. But ultimately, I think let's just keep it down to the fact that it's hydration, barrier care. Also, I think percentages is a little, I would say I would like it to be a little more dialed in because, ultimately we feel like it seems that you need at least 2% and higher to even achieve more of those like soothing benefits we're trying to achieve. So I think that's where I would say is lacking, but we can definitely say, thank God Ectoin has actual testing we can talk about.
Yeah. And I should say that even though I make it seem like niacinamide is better than Ectoin, but all of the barrier care studies we find, I personally feel like, from just a barrier care perspective, it almost feels more interesting than niacinamide in some respect.
Especially, I think that's a really good point, and actually feels kind of weird to say.
Yeah, right? Ooh,
but
scandalous.
Yeah. But with that, we should take a quick break.
Regarding the animal fun fact corner.
All right, let's do this.
All right, this is going to be very, very quick because I'm going to butcher a lot of facts in here. I'm just going to come out and say I got this. I was listening to Radiolab, the podcast, and this was highly recommend. They cover a lot of really random subjects. Yeah. Nothing consistent about this whatsoever. And once in a while, they cover something interesting about animals. And in this episode, it's called Quantum Birds, and they're talking about the northern saw-whet owls. They are adorable. I'm gonna put the picture up. They're these tiny little owls. They're like yay big, literally the size of like in the episode they describe it as like about the size of a soda can. And if you see those like memes of like or like little clips of people like grabbing little owls, it's probably one of these. They have these like very cat-like expressions on their face. It's super duper cute. And there's like the reason why they cover this out is they are looking at migratory birds in general.
Okay.
And for a really long time, not even just migratory birds, any animals that migrate really long distances kind of have scientists stumped on how they are able to know where to go. And they're saying, so this owl in particular travels they go south for the winter. They travel over North America, and they have a lot of acute senses, right? They have way better low frequency hearing than humans, so they can kind of hear an earthquake. They can detect wind direction, things like that. But they didn't get into how they decipher this, but they're saying even if you rob them of those senses, they still know where to go. So and they migrate at night, so like the lighting's not good. Huh?
Sorry, quick question. When you say rob them of their senses,
they didn't get into it. I had the same question.
Are they letting deaf birds fly?
I don't know.
All right. Anyways,
but basically, these birds and all migratory animals just seem to know where to go. And for a long time, they had no idea why. And there is a theory that somehow and the working theory is they can somehow interact where they can see Earth's magnetic field.
Oh, wow.
So that's how they know. And then for a while, there's a theory that there is on their beak, there is, I forgot what they call it, like magnetite or something, like basically a substance that is magnetic. So they can kind of, like literally magnets pulling them where to go. But then that theory was like kind of tossed out because in their beak, there's no nerves. There's nothing going to their brain. So
how would they signal?
Yeah, how would they translate to knowing where to go? And also Earth's magnetic field is big, but really, really weak. So how would a magnet here be
that sensitive?
Right. So so then what's really interesting is this is the part where I'm going to butcher it, right? This is where quantum physics actually come into play. My father is a physicist and he is going to kill over hearing me talk about this. But basically in quantum physics, there's a lot of really, it's its own area of study because it defies what you and I think of as normal physics. And one of the phenomenons is this thing called the radical pair, which is when two electrons, two electrons, they bond, they pair, they form this radical pair. But it's not a bond that's affected by distance. So it can be a bond that forms from the other end of Earth.
But they're still bonded.
And basically, if one of them is affected, the other one gets triggered right away. It's like an instantaneous bond. And this bond is highly, highly sensitive to magnetic fields. So even something as weak as the Earth's magnetic field can change this radical pair. So they actually identify these substances they call cryptochromes in the back of birds' eyeballs. It just forms this web of radical pairs from all over the place. But they're weak, right? They're just weak radical pairs that can change the configuration all the time. And so when these radical pairs get hit with Earth's magnetic field, they're constantly changing configurations. And in that sense, they can see Earth's magnetic field. I know. I kind of don't know what I just said. The episode does a really good job going into it, but it's really.
No, I'm just thinking, I'm like, I'm sure there's a bunch of genius physicists that have to analyze these birds, and they probably never thought that they would have to, that would be where their field would lead them to.
So it's funny you said that. They did mention in the episode that this theory was proposed by a physicist really early, I think in the 70s or 80s. And then he was like laughed off like publication, like this sounds freaking crazy.
Theory about the bird.
Yeah, that they can see that it's because of quantum physics that they can see Earth's magnetic field.
This poor man.
And they're like, yeah. And then this, for a really long time, this theory wasn't picked up.
Yeah.
But it's because this one biologist was explaining it, that when he was first reading it, he was like, huh? Like, because physics is not biologist's strong suit. And he was like, I straight up could not understand the math that was in this paper.
Sure.
And it was too abstract. And as someone that's dabbled very, very briefly in high level math, I'm like, huh? Totally understand. Like, you don't, when I took PChem, I drew a palm tree, my final exam. It's like, it can get very abstract, very difficult. Yeah. So for a long time, these fields didn't link up. And
makes sense.
The reason why they looked at these birds, the saw-whet owls I mentioned in the very beginning, is because the way their eyes structured makes it easier for people to see.
Analyze.
Like without going to dissection, they can see the parts of the eyes a lot easier. So that's why they study these birds to identify these molecules that would form these radical bonds.
Okay, so is this like a more established theory now? Okay, wow.
Yeah, it is. And it's really, really cool. And I am not going to pretend I understand it fully, but they did a bit in the episode where they say that when you change directions, the field changes. So basically, because you can't see what the bird sees, birds can already see a lot more colors than the humans can see. So basically, it's almost the perception is that it's like an overlay of like lightness, darkness over their visual vision.
Okay.
And then it's like it changes like where it's like a compass built in your eyes. So
this just makes me think human eyeballs are so lame.
Yeah, it's very bland. I still remember.
So lame.
Yeah, like they were talking about. Oh God, sorry, this is a long segue, but really, really quickly, they're saying how like dogs see less colors than humans, right? Because we have 3 types of cones that sees RGB basically. And then I still remember this blip talking about like mantis shrimp with like they have like something like 16 cones or something, and it's just like the psychedelic level of colors that they see
24/7.
Yeah, and just like humans can't comprehend that. So I think that's so cool. Anyway, that's it.
Yay.
Check out the episode. I did not explain it super well.
Yay! All right, and with that super nerdy animal fun fact, get back into Ectoin.
All right. Okay. Ectoin in your routine, how to shop for it.
I have one feeling.
Yes.
When we were looking at Ectoin product, never have I felt more confused, and I don't know if this is a good way of shopping for skincare.
Yes,
because it is like we kind of gripe about like toners feeling all over the place and whatnot. I'm like, Ectoin products is all over the place, which in a way I think makes sense. But yeah, we can get into it. Yeah.
So number one is before we even put this episode together, we kind of know of a couple of products off the top of our head that does feature and talk about Ectoin. Like the Inky list specifically has an Ectoin serum. But I didn't know if there's more out there that we're missing. So I Googled it. I straight up Googled Ectoin and Ectoin skincare. And up top, a bunch of products pop up. Let me tell you, don't do that. Because some of the products that popped out was like products I know of or used before.
Also, I don't think have Ectoin.
Exactly. Don't have Ectoin. I don't even know why it popped up. So just a friendly reminder.
Check the IL. All right. So yeah, and I think probably instead of us discussing the landscape, what we should really discuss is why would you have Ectoin in your skincare? Which is ultimately if you are trying to look at basically moisturizer, hydrating properties, skin barrier health, then Ectoin could be on your radar. However, the problem with Ectoin in skincare is that you're not going to find very transparent percentages.
Yeah.
So, unfortunately, because of that, we have to say that Ectoin, if you find it in your skincare, we would consider it like a nice bonus. Will we recommend using that as a purchasing decision, like black and white, it has Ectoin I'm buying? Probably not, unless that product comes with some really good testing.
Yep.
The other thing that's difficult about Ectoin products is the textures are quite wide.
Yeah, we've seen stuff from like serums to like water-based moisturizers. It's in that sense, yes, it's like niacinamide. You can find it in a wide range of products.
Yes. So with that, we should say if Ectoin sounds really interesting, let's say you've tried all the hydration, the barrier care, and it's not enough, and it's something you want to start looking for. And we would say the testing does make it valid as worth a shot. I think the general recommendation for concentration to aim for is at least 1 to 2%.
Yep.
The testing, you can see that it tests from a pretty wide range, and in probably the EU, because I would say in the US it's not as common to find 5 to 7%, but probably 1 to 2% is that target area if you can find.
Yeah, so with that, the two products we did pick up to test ourselves are the Inky Liz Ectoin Serum and then also Prequel's Multi-Quench Serum. So next episode, we'll get into the claims, the Decode, our personal experience with it, and we'll see you guys all next week.
Bye, guys.
Bye. All right, great.